Smoking is older than farming, older than pottery, older than the wheel, older than writing, money, and every religion still practiced on Earth today. The proof is 4 burnt seeds sitting in the ash of fire in the Utah desert, next to a pile of duck bones. 12,300 years old, which means that before humans could reliably grow a single meal, somebody was already at a fire, doing something very deliberate with a plant that does absolutely nothing for hunger. And here's the strangest part. Nobody can prove exactly what they did with it. No pipe, no stem, no mospiese, just seeds, ash, and a decision made 120 centuries ago that the species has never once stopped repeating. Everything that comes after this, the sacred pipes, the funerals, the arrests, the empires built on a single leaf, starts at that fire. So rewind, all the way back to the end of the last ice age. A hearth in what is now the Great Salt Lake Desert, northern Utah. Flat, cracked, empty ground in every direction. Whoever camped here ate duck. A lot of duck. There are wishbones scattered everywhere, enough that archaeologists ended up naming the entire site after them. And in the ash of that fire, mixed in with dinner, sit 4 small charred seed from a wild tobacco plant. Not decoration, not an accident, deliberately placed in a working fire right next to a meal. Somebody at that hearth was doing something with nicotine on purpose. In 2021, archaeologist Darren Duke and his team dated that hearth. 12,300 years old, published in Nature Human Behavior, and it did not go over quietly. Because before this find, the oldest confirmed tobacco use anywhere came from nicotine residue on a pipe about 3,300 years old. This pushed the timeline back 9,000 years. In one afternoon, next to some duck wishbones, archaeology is not always dignified. And here's the part that ruins the mental image. We don't actually know if they smoked it. No pipe, no stem, just seeds in a hearth with no way to prove whether it was rolled, chewed, sucked as a wad, or just tossed on the coals so everyone in the circle got a contact high. Whatever the method, it worked well enough that someone thought it was worth doing again. And they were doing it roughly 9,000 years before anyone on Earth had invented farming. Before bread, before beer, before a single domesticated crop existed anywhere. Humans had a nicotine habit before they had agriculture. Priorities, apparently, run deep. Now, that pipe we just mentioned, the 3,300-year-old one, the one that got completely dethroned by a hearth full of duck bones, it deserves its own moment. Because for years, it was the oldest confirmed smoking device on the continent. It's called the Flint River Pipe, found in northern Alabama, from a culture archaeologists call the Late Archaic. In 2018, researchers ran it through mass spectrometry and confirmed nicotine residue baked into the stone. But they found something else in there too. Vanillin and cinnamaldehyde, the active flavor compounds in vanilla and cinnamon. Someone, over 3,000 years ago, was not just smoking tobacco. They were smoking a flavor blend. Somewhere in late archaic Alabama, a person looked at a pile of plain tobacco and thought, this needs a little something. That is not survival behavior. That is a preference. So now we've got 2 separate, unrelated moments in ancient North America where humans deliberately chose to inhale or ingest a mind-altering plant thousands of years apart. And at least one of them was doing it with taste in mind. And that's before we even leave the continent. Fast forward from that Alabama pipe by about 1,000 years, and smoking in North America stops being a private habit and starts becoming architecture. This is the sacred pipe tradition, sometimes called the calumet, and it did not start as the polished stone bowl most people picture. It started in the southeastern culture area of North America as something much simpler, a decorated reed, no bowl attached, just a hollow stem and some feathers. From there, over centuries, it spread north and west into the plains and prairie nations, and it picked up a bowl along the way, carved out of a very specific material. Catlinite, a soft red claystone found almost nowhere else on Earth except a single quarry in what's now Minnesota. That quarry was considered such sacred, neutral ground that rival nations would lay down weapons just to dig there together. Smoking by this point wasn't just a habit. It was diplomacy. It sealed treaties. It opened councils. It welcomed strangers into a lodge without a word of shared language required. The first European to write any of this down was a French missionary named Louis Hennepin in 1678, describing a pipe used as a literal safe-conduct pass through hostile territory. A lit bowl of tobacco, doing the job of a passport. Somewhere, a modern airport security officer is having a very bad day trying to make sense of that logic. Meanwhile, artisans within these same pipe-smoking cultures were turning the equipment itself into sculpture. In Ohio, roughly 2,000 years ago, the Hopewell culture carved smoking pipes shaped like owls, hawks, coiled snakes, and bears out of stone, with a level of anatomical detail that shows up in almost no other everyday object from the period. These weren't hidden away. They were buried in ceremonial mounds, in caches clearly meant to be seen and remembered. Smoking had gone from something done at a hearth to something people commissioned an artist for. Nobody had to explain that upgrade to anybody. It just kept happening generation after generation, one carved bowl at a time. And while all of that was unfolding across North America, on the other side of the planet, an entirely different culture was inventing its own version of the exact same idea, with zero contact and zero knowledge that the other one existed. Central Asia, the Pamir Mountains, a cemetery called Drzankel. In 2019, a team led by archaeologist Emin Yang examined 10 wooden burners pulled from 8 different tombs. Inside them, burnt stones coated in residue. That residue tested positive for cannabis, with THC levels way higher than any wild cannabis plant produces on its own, meaning somebody 2,500 years ago had already been selectively growing the strong stuff and burning it in an enclosed space at a funeral on purpose. This is not a seed in a hearth open to argument. This is a labeled smoking device doing exactly one job. Here's where it gets stranger. About 100 years after this cemetery was in use, a Greek historian named Herodotus wrote about a group living roughly in this same region. He described them throwing cannabis seeds onto red-hot stones inside a small tent and, in his own words, howling with pleasure at the vapor. He wrote that down as a strange foreign custom he'd heard about secondhand, the ancient equivalent of a rumor. Archaeologists dug up the exact hardware 2,500 years later. Herodotus wasn't exaggerating. He was fact-checking a funeral he never even attended. So by this point in the story, humans on at least 2 continents, with zero contact between them, have independently gone from unmarked plant matter near a fire to purpose-built smoking equipment with a documented eyewitness. Which brings us to the part where this stops being a handful of scattered, separate habits and becomes one single global one, almost overnight. That switch flips in 1492. When Columbus's ships reached Cuba, 2 of his men, Rodrigo de Jerez and Luis de Torres, watched local people rolling dried leaves and smoking them. Rodrigo de Jerez liked it enough to bring the habit home to Spain with him. According to popular accounts, his own neighbors were so alarmed by a man exhaling smoke out of his face that he was reportedly reported to the Spanish Inquisition on the theory that only something possessed by the devil could breathe like a chimney. He may have spent time in prison over it. Years later, he came home to find half of Spain doing the exact same thing he'd been locked up for. That's not a redemption arc. That's just really bad timing. From there, it spreads fast. A French diplomat named Jean Nicot promoted the plant so heavily across Europe that its genus and the word nicotine both got named after him. Portuguese and Spanish traders carried tobacco seeds and the habit itself into Africa, India, the Middle East, and East Asia within the same century. Within 100 years, a plant that 12,000 years earlier had been a handful of charred seeds next to some duck bones in the Utah desert had become one of the most heavily traded commodities on the planet. It spread faster than sugar, faster than coffee, faster than chocolate. Humanity had a 9,000-year head start on wanting this, and the rest of the world just needed an invitation. So zoom out and look at the whole shape of it. A desert hearth in Utah, 12,300 years ago. A flavored pipe in Alabama, over 3,000 years ago. A funeral on a mountain in Central Asia, 2,500 years ago. A ceremonial mound in Ohio, 2,000 years ago. A sacred bowl carved from a single quarry, used to seal treaties across an entire continent. And one Spanish sailor, arrested for doing something his own grandchildren would consider completely normal. Different continents, different plants, different centuries. No coordinación whatsoever. And every single one of them landed on the same idea. Take a plant, burn it, breathe it in on purpose, and build a ritual, a relationship, or an entire economy around doing it again. This wasn't invented once and copied. It was reinvented independently everywhere humans went, like it was written into the species from the start. So the next time someone calls smoking a modern vice, the receipts are right here. It is older than farming, older than the wheel, older than the written word. They just didn't have a warning label yet. People do now, and plenty still light up anyway. But here's the actual finish of it. The man at the Utah hearth. Whoever flavored their tobacco with cinnamon in Alabama. Whoever built the first bowl out of that one red stone in Minnesota. The sailor arrested in Spain for exhaling in public. Every single one of them is gone. Completely. Most of them without even a name attached. The only thing that made it out of all 12,300 years alive is the habit itself. It didn't need any of them to survive. It just needed one more person in the next generation willing to do it again. That's not really a story about smoking. That's a story about the one part of a person that never actually needs the person to keep existing. And that's the story. Subscribing is what catches the next one the moment it drops. One click, no cost, and nothing gets missed from here. For anyone whose view of this habit just shifted a little, hitting like is the only reason more people ever get shown videos like this one. And for anyone who wants to know why humans do the things assumed to be just normal, there's a lot more buried back there. Stick around. Next time, the ritual nobody talks about that every single human ancestor went through, and that for most of human history came with a real chance of not surviving it.